Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you guys are doing well. Hope you're healthy and reading. I'm going to talk a bit about that first section of Small Island today, up to page 89, where we learn a lot about Hortense as a character. Before that, I have an announcement to make. We have a theme song now. I made it, so we're going to go ahead. Theme song. Small Island. Anyway, Small Island is great. I hope you guys are enjoying it. In this first section, starting from chapter 3, moving forward, we get a lot of information about Hortense. Chapter 3 in particular is just packed with details, and we learn about Hortense's parents, that her father was a well-known politician, highly respected, highly regarded, and her mother was some woman from a village and of a lower class economically. And what's interesting, she is described as having much darker skin, along with Hortense's grandmother, whereas her father has a lighter complexion. And so there's a lot in this chapter about Hortense kind of identifying with that complexion that she inherited from her father, and this idea of kind of colorism, and assuming that she deserves something special, or she deserves more, or she's destined to a better life because of that lighter skin. And that plays out in many different ways throughout this section. We see it in probably every chapter here with Hortense. And the other big element of that is her friend Michael. And so, first of all, she doesn't have her parents. Her father, because he's a politician, he doesn't want the scandal of this affair he had with some village woman, so he sends the child, Hortense, off to live with his cousins. And the mother, Hortense's mother, is sent off to Cuba, just to a whole other island. And then Hortense's grandmother goes with her to become the servant to her father's cousin. So her grandma's there to raise her, but she's sort of a servant. It's this really strange relationship. But that's where our introduction to her and family, and her kind of lack of identity, and her desire to kind of be that person that she thinks she is destined to be because who her father was. Even though her dad seems like a pretty terrible person from our perspective, he's the one she identifies with. And her skin tone is one way that she kind of attaches to her father, and not her mother. So that's a really important part. Michael ends up having an affair. We see them growing up, and Michael has an affair with this missionary, a white woman, and it kind of wrecks Hortense a little bit. She's kind of thinks that maybe he's coming to see her. There's this hurricane, this really dramatic scene, and it's set up like a romantic moment. And you should go back and read it. And it's toward the end of chapter 3. And it's described almost like a corny movie, and he's like all wet from the rain, and he's been running, and he's out of breath, and he like takes his shirt off, and Hortense is like, I knew it. He ran across the island for me. But he basically like pushes her aside and goes straight up to Mrs. Ryder, this missionary's wife, and he is almost immediately shipped off to England, and that's the end of Michael as we know it. His parents are not having it. So chapter 2, we see her going off to school, and we see her valuing education. The education system is very British, very English. The teachers are white. The material is English and British, and we see that as she learns and grows, her identity, her view of what is high class, her view of what's proper, her view of what matters or is of high quality, all of that goes back to this British sense of identity that, ironically, she doesn't have because she's Jamaican. But she attaches on to it. So her education, her way of speaking, as we saw in the first couple chapters, chapter 1, all of that, we see how it is a mixture of these major subjects of colonialism and identity and class and race, and that colorism as part of race, all of that kind of mixed in, and it leaves her feeling entitled to something better, which we see in the first couple chapters, right? When she is not okay with the situation in 1948. And so she's off at school. There's also her and her friend are watching the soldiers getting ready to leave for the war. And so we have this setup that this is kind of the situation and what's going on in the world, and that the Jamaican soldiers are going to fight for England. They're British soldiers, and there's a lot of colonialism in those discussions as well. And after that, we see the next chapter. We meet Gilbert, and so we know in 1948 they're married, but here they don't know each other. She thinks she sees Michael, chases after him. It's in the middle of this political rally turning into a riot. It's kind of violent. He basically saves her, carries her away from the chaos, but it's not Michael. Turns out it's Gilbert. Because of the way it's written, the audience knows she's gonna marry this guy. The character does not in the moment, right? So there's this dramatic irony that is made possible by the structure of the book. So it's an interesting moment because we see how she's just not into this guy. He seems like he's trying to impress her, trying to be funny, and she's just not having it. So it's a really interesting device that the author uses to bring these characters together, especially because the next time we see Gilbert, he's not dating Hortense, he's dating Celia, Hortense's best friend. But again, we know he marries Hortense, and we know Hortense is looking back from chapter 1 saying, well, if I wish Celia could see me now. Now we kind of know why. She's married to her boyfriend, and she's in London with him. There's a strange moment where Gilbert is gonna take Celia to England with him, and Hortense kind of destroys their whole plan and says, well, what about your mom, Celia? And we have already seen Celia's mom has some undefined mental health struggle. We saw her approach a soldier on the street as if she knew who he was and made this big scene, and you know, Celia was really embarrassed. So when Hortense says, you can't go to England, who's going to take care of your mom? And Gilbert's kind of confused. We start to see the reality of it, that it's just not an option for Celia. And it's kind of rude. It's kind of harsh for Hortense to just let that out the way she did. Not very sensitive to her friend. And the next thing we know, she says, hey, Gilbert, I've got some money. Why don't you marry me? And I'll pay for your ticket. Then you can go work in London, pay for my ticket when you can afford it. And now we know that that's what happened. There's an interesting moment in there too, where she is living with this English family, this white family, the Andersons, and she's kind of shocked because they are a little bit crass and kind of gross and weird, and they do not fit this perspective that Hortense has of what an English person must be like, right? An English person is probably so classy and so intelligent and so refined and has so much dignity and honor, and these Andersons are nothing like that, but they're white. And so it's a challenge to her own internal struggle with the way she views others. I mean, at one point, Celia says, we can't let Hitler win because he'll make us all slaves again. And in effect, we see a really truthful moment from Hortense when she says, why would, maybe you would worry, Celia, because you have darker skin, but Hortense really thinks that because she has a lighter complexion, somehow Hitler wouldn't mind and would just like let her go. And so we see a real the almost arrogance that she has, and that hasn't really been challenged yet. And lastly, I want to mention funny moment with Gilbert. We really start to get to know him. We learn that he lost all his money because he invested in some bees. It has a really weird and funny exchange, and we already kind of get this sense that Gilbert as a character he's funny and clever, kind of can't really get anything right. We saw that in chapter 2. Everything went wrong. That's what happens here. So they get married, and there's a very uncomfortable wedding night between them, and we see that Hortense is pretty ignorant, and Hortense is pretty inexperienced, and she thinks she's brilliant, and she thinks she's the best, and she thinks just the world of herself. But when it comes to something like having sex with her husband, she has no idea, and she's terrified, and it's this really uncomfortable situation for the characters and for the reader. So be glad I didn't read that out loud to you. So there's a good sign. Anyway, that's kind of the section. So when we get back to the 1948 chapters, we understand Hortense and Gilbert a lot more differently. We understand a lot about Hortense and where she came from. So like I mentioned, those subjects that come up, colonialism and race, and in this case, colorism and complexion, as well as class and identity, are all mixed together for Hortense, and how she views herself and how she views what a dignified British person should be, and how she kind of aspires to that. Just like we saw in chapter 1, something didn't work, right? She expected more respect, I think, when she got to London. She expected to fit in, to live in a better place, to, because she speaks well, because she is so articulate and educated. But that comes really crashing down. And so this sets up the Gilbert section. So after we get some more 1948, we're going to hop back to another before section, but this time it'll be all about Gilbert. And what I hope that you guys see is that Gilbert is a lot more than just this wacky kind of comedic character, although he is funny, but we see another depth and complexity to him that we don't get otherwise in those 1948 sections or in the Hortense sections. So hopefully with this Gilbert stuff, you will start to get a better understanding of who he is and the way he thinks, and how the author uses his more informal style of narration compared to Hortense's formal to create humor, but also to kind of mix the humorous with these kind of deep thoughts, profound ideas about colonialism and race that he sneaks in there. Okay, I'm gonna get out of here. You get back to reading. Tell me what you're reading besides Small Island. Seriously, tell me what you're reading, and we'll do that. You guys are great. Hope you're well. Stay healthy. Stay inside. Read more books. Talk to you soon.